Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
CubeMonk, featuring the world's first smart cube. Track your goods with our advanced GPS system. Welcome to the future of moving and relocation at cubemonk.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by heirs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at heirs.com.
Insured Nomads provides protection and peace of mind with health insurance, travel insurance, group, or tailored insurance for the globally mobile. Visit us at insurednomads.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
Hi, this is Ed Cohen, your broadcast host on Global TV Talk Show, the business unit of globalbusinessnews.net. We're into education today. Learn for life. Welcome, Jessica Shopoff from San Antonio and Chase Eskelsen from Verano Learning in Frisco, Texas. So Texas and California, here we are. So welcome, Jessica. This is your first time on our program.
It is. Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
Glad to have you. Okay, so your background is with K through 12 and using data to support education, teachers, parents, kids, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Yes, I kind of came to data a little unconventionally. I was a teacher, so really started with teacher background, elementary school, loved teaching. My parents are both teachers. So education is really my passion. I came to data a little later, joined K-12. One day my boss said, "Hey, you know Excel?" I was like, "Sure, I can put in a few formulas. I know how to do Excel, right?" And so I started being kind of the data person just because I knew Excel. And that kind of grew. I realized I really love data and really loved putting together kind of my math, science, computer skills with my passion for education. So yeah, so I've supported, now I've been doing this work, I guess, about 14 years. And I've supported, students, teachers, administrators, policy teams. And then now I have landed, I'm completing my second year. Currently, I'll finish up in May as a data fellow with Harvard's Strategic Data Project. And so my job placement is with Learn for Life. I've continued to do kind of that data work, supporting schools, supporting leaders, but also trying to guide us towards better policies too.
Well, that's cool. So let's talk about today, data, and the digital schools versus traditional schools. So data applications are, and online education, Chase, it's a one-on-one, right? It's what it's all about, data.
Yeah, Ed and I were having this conversation earlier today. Is it data or data? I think it just depends on where you rest your head at the end of the day. But yeah, it's the idea of using data to drive student success. While maybe we would say it's not a new idea, maybe, but in the broader scope of education, education stayed relatively stagnant for 200 years in America. And looking at some of the methods of teaching from the Western world, it really didn't change that much for a long, long time. But now, with the mixing of digital technology and education, we're able to pull data out and use it in ways that it has not been used in the past. And I would say we're using it, and hopefully we're using it across all traditional schools and digital schools and new innovative schools, whatever, in a way that's driving student achievement. And I think that's really the goal. And what we want to talk about today is, yes, there's a lot of data out there, but how do we use it to drive student success? And Jessica and I both will agree, what we're doing with digital technology and education, it's not so much that it's a job for us. And we've talked about this a lot. It's really a calling. How do we take the very best of the digital infrastructure, the very best of an in-person experience, and stick them together so that students are successful long-term?
So this is all about evidence-based planning, using the data to make a decision.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of people think that data itself is kind of evidence, but I think that there's a lot of data that is out there that until you are asking the right questions, until you know what the questions from stakeholders are, and you're using data to then answer that and provide evidence that things are working or they're not working, they're not interchangeable. You can have a whole lot of data and have very little evidence if you don't take that data and strategically utilize it. And so that's a lot of the work that I have done over the years, is really trying to get us to moving towards higher levels of evidence, not just, hey, it looks like this might work, not anecdotal evidence, but real data backed, and eventually like really high level randomized control type research where we can really say like, hey, this is truly working. But yes, I think you can have a lot of data and not have evidence. And so it's really trying to get people to understand how to use the data to change behavior, not just have a whole lot of data available to you.
So give us an example or two of the use of the data today.
Yeah, so I would say a lot of my work is really taking data and answering questions from stakeholders. And I would say generally what we see is there's kind of a couple of challenges associated with getting data into the hands of people that need them to drive action. So for example, we know in our schools, a lot of our students come to us having already dropped out or significantly at risk. And so how do we use the data we know about students coming in to ensure that we can accelerate their learning towards graduation, knowing that they're already behind? So how do we take what we know, take the data and make it actionable, not just information that's like, oh, okay, now I know that a student's behind. Connecting that to the so what. I call that the so what factor. If you put out a data tool and it just says, hey, the students are behind, so what? What do I do about that? So really trying to connect that research to practice. And if you haven't engaged the people in the field, the people on the ground in your organization, whether that's a school or a business or anything, if you aren't answering the questions that people on the ground and kind of in the field have, then you run the risk of putting out a really, really great data tool that doesn't actually drive the action or the decision making to change. So that's really the goal, is to take that data, make it actionable, and kind of solve that so what factor.
Good, thank you. Chase?
I think there's a second layer to some of the things that Jessica's talked about. And I would say I'm okay with data. I'm not, as technically advanced as Jessica, but I could pull some spreadsheets and make some decisions based on that. But the other piece of this is having this great data, answering those tough questions, but then learning how do we present that to whichever stakeholder it is in a way that they can consume it and then work together with that stakeholder to make an actionable item. I gave the example earlier, Ed, in the previous show this morning with you. We have student quiz and test data, and we can use it in a very simple format. Hey, all the kids missed question 7. Well, that's a very simple thing to show on a graph because, well, you have a graph that goes up and shows on question 1, 80% of the students got it correct. On graph 2, 90% got it correct. And then on question 7, there's no graph. It shows there's a big error here. There's something that needs to happen. And the decision that needs to change, or the action that becomes a real life change, is that teacher needs to reteach whatever the concept was around question 7. And that's one way that we can use data in a very simplified format. But I've seen some spreadsheets where Jessica's had millions of rows of data, and it has achievement data, it has accountability data, it has demographic data, like it has all this information. So how do we take this millions and millions and millions of data points and show it in a way that's useful? And I think that there's a piece there that gets lost in translation so many times because you've got great genius nerds, no offense, Jessica, but you've got these people who can do all these amazing things, but it never translates into something simplified to be able to turn and use. Jessica, I know you've got thoughts on that.
Many thoughts. I think that there's so many challenges that we encounter as data analysts, as researchers, but really tying that, if you don't start with engaging the stakeholders up front to say, what are the real problems, challenges, and questions you have, then we often will see, I've seen countless examples of really awesome dashboards, visually appealing reports that never go anywhere. And it often is related to one of three things. They didn't ask the right questions because they didn't engage the right stakeholders up front. They overestimate what people's ability is to interpret that data. I think any organization, no matter what type of organization you are, if you aren't building data capacity within the people in your organization to be able to absorb the reports that are coming out, and that's on the data analyst to make sure it's absorbable, to put it in, a context that's understandable. But at the same time, the data analyst should be making it understandable. You should also be building the data capacity in your organization, the data literacy in your organization for people to interpret data and then connect that to a so what. So yes, I think that there's a lot of really too technical reports for organizations to actually make change upon. But at the same time, if you're not doing your work as an organization to build that within your organization, you're going to continue to see this gap between the researchers having a very technical report and your organization, in the field, people not being able to really bridge that gap.
So Jessica, is there a direct link between, maybe this is too obvious, but I to benefit the audience, is there a direct link between, through data points, is there a direct link between connectivity, student learning at home, availability of high bandwidth, and time, dedicated time online, and to success in your schools?
Yeah, and I think that there's still, the evidence is really still coming out on that. I think we've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence for sure of specific districts that say, hey, I know within my district, this population of students doesn't have, connectivity to access online schools. And so we're down X% in attendance where we would typically be. I think as far as like a nationwide study on connectivity and that's the current impact in light of COVID and so many schools being fully online will probably be delayed. I think often what we see with your more nationwide, comprehensive, rigorous studies, they are time consuming. They do take time to collect the data from the different states to get it into a normed format where it's applicable across all the different ways that states measure things. And so I would say, yes, there's going to be a relationship between connectivity, the family's ability to access the online, and their success in that virtual type format of schooling. As far as real, rigorous evidence, I think that's still to come out.
And is data analysis better on certain topics than more or less than others?
I think that's a great question. I think that there are many ways that you can collect data. I've done a lot. Most of my work has been more quantitative, your real numbers-based analysis. More recently, my organization has been working with a third-party partner to do qualitative, so more like surveys, interviews, more of the kind of human side of the data. There's still analysis there, and there's still important findings, and I think that helps us get to why things are or how things happen. So I think that you can probably use data even if it's very informally or very qualitative and survey-based. I think that there's data that can address questions across every sector, across every kind of business type and life experience. But I think it really depends on what level of what you can consider data. And I think that is kind of up for debate. Some people would say, well, survey data is qualitative, it's soft, it doesn't feel like it's real. It's not real analysis. But I've come around. I really actually have found qualitative data to really be helpful too.
So Chase, can I assume that this kind of approach is definitely used in the iCode school, but maybe not so much in other schools?
I think, first of all, yes, it is definitely used in iCode, but I would say that it's used across all school types, not just one specific. And to Jessica's point, we do use both types of data because really one or the other only tells half the story, because a student could be struggling and the data shows that the student's struggling, but the student might really love it. And so that would change some of the decisions that we might make, specifically related to iCode. They might really love working on the drone projects, but they're just not good at coding a drone yet. So we want to take both of those pieces into consideration as we build out the next iteration of that class.
Oh, good. Details. So where do we go from here in this conversation? It's obvious that the data, having data about kids, about how they reply or how they respond to certain stimulus, classroom, stimulants, or the degree of parental support or advocacy, as we've heard in other shows, it all comes together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. Just go ahead.
Yes, I think that you have to take the whole picture of everything, whether that's a student or a school, an organization. So while I'm a huge supporter of data-driven decision-making and using data, data is only a portion of the story. And you really do have to understand the political context, the societal context of the organization or the school or the student. You have to understand a lot more about who they are. The data that we typically look at represent people, like real human lives, whether it's a teacher or a student or an administrator or somebody that works in a business. You're still talking about a person. And so I think that there's a real importance to be placed on ensuring that you interpret data within context and that you remember when you're making decisions that these are impacting lives, in our case, students. And so when we make a decision, we have to remember that it's not just numbers. And so I like to really, and this is something that Chase and I have a lot of experience with, really weaving together the data and what the data and evidence show with the stories of the people involved, whether that's students or teachers, what they said in surveys, their personal experience with that, and saying, here's the numbers, in our schools, 70% of students come to us a year behind. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, that means for, Maria, that she was doing great in school and then her mom got sick and she had to take on a job. So how do we make it personal so that people understand when we make a decision, these are people and we have to make a decision that's right by the people that we serve. And that makes it a little easier to tie everything together, to get the big picture, not just the number, but the big picture of what's happening. Chase, I don't know if you want to add, sorry about that.
Yeah, probably the piece that Jessica and I spent several years working together on that I think really informs this is understanding how to use this data and present it in a way to specifically policymakers, legislators, people that make decisions that will influence a school. For instance, this is really a simple idea, but we worked with a lot of full-time online schools, and there are certain states in the US that require all schools to have a school nurse on site. Well, that's great, except for the fact that we have one little office building for the administration and there's no students, but we had to pay a nurse to sit on site and twiddle her thumbs all day. And so we take data to the State House and we say, hey guys, here's what the law says, but perhaps we bring this thing up to the 21st century and we say we have to have a school nurse or a health individual support students for these items. And what did we do that changed? We had a mobile nurse unit that would go out into the communities and serve these students where they were, versus having them all come up to, Dallas, Texas. Well, Texas is a big state. You can drive 9 hours and still be in the same state, and you're driving in a straight line. So using data to describe to a policymaker, hey, this is what it says, but it's not doing its intended purpose. Can we update the language to best serve students? And again, yes, we're in education. We want to use the data to students' success and achievement, but success takes many forms. And part of that is making sure that they're healthy and that they are properly cared for.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
So as online learning becomes more doable and more popular going forward, data is going to be the hardcore common base, won't it?
I think so. Your digital schools, I've worked in online education for many years now. And so I think I was most impressed coming from a brick and mortar classroom where I taught in person, my first graders. I knew a lot of data about my students, but more, it was kind of only I knew that. I had been the one grading their papers. I had seen what they had said in class. I knew their discussions. And so I was able to say like, oh, this student actually gets it, or this student is struggling. I need to find a different way to support them. But I knew that based on the data I gathered, and really that data kind of lived with me. And I was most impressed when I moved into online education that data doesn't live with a single individual. That teacher knows a lot about their students, but the digital tools also provide a lot of insight about students that's available at a much larger scale. And so the tools provide data on how often they're logging in, how often are they commenting on things, what are their grades, and not just their grades. Like I would know my student had missed 2 or 3 questions. I would know like, oh, a lot of students missed question 3, but kind of what are the data available on digital schools is like, what standards do those things have in common? What do we see as patterns across the nation maybe with those questions? So the data is available at a much larger level, which has its benefits. You'll see that people can really start to analyze things at kind of a much larger level. It also comes with downsides. We have sometimes in online schools or digital schools, we have way too many pieces of data, and we don't even know where to start to filter through and say, hey, these are important or these aren't. We want to have a dashboard for everything. And so I think really trying to pare down to like, what are the most important indicators of student success or teacher success or school success, and then guide the data to be around those things. It might not be data you already collect. You might have to go out and say, hey, we also need to collect this piece of data. So instead of saying we have all this data available, what should we do with it? The question really still needs to come back to like, what are the questions we have? What are the challenges we have? And then what data do we have to address those?
So this is a little off the wall, guys, but let's just say that particularly nowadays with online, the student who brings themselves to you as, say, grade 1 or 2, at that age, they bring themselves and they're energetic for whatever the reason. They're energetic to be in the school setting, and but then you have other kids who, the family situation or the home environment will impact whether the kid is able to focus or feel comfortable. So I don't know, the data is certainly there, but it's kind of mushy. So a lot has to do with the teacher, your expertise in zeroing in on, hey, there's something going on here. The kid's not tuned in, not responsive the way other kids are. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but how do you deal with that in this kind of a data environment?
Yeah, so you really have to think of it as a two-pronged approach, right? We use the data to drive as much of the conversation as we can, but it can't overpower the human piece of it. And that's where in the past, the digital pieces have kind of gotten lost in the shuffle, because we say, well, we have to be driven by purely data, and we should be using data to make decisions, yes, but there's a human aspect to it all. And really from a Verano perspective, and you and I have talked about this a lot on this show, is you can't lose the human element. That teacher has that relationship. They know the backstory. They know what's happening with that student. And so they can adjust that student's curriculum. They can adjust what's going on with that student in a way that's meaningful to that individual student. And really that's what it all comes back to is we use data to individualize instruction. And, people that have a lot of data use it in some form or another to what we like to say, oh, we can individualize it purely for this one student. I think we're still getting there on some areas, but the point is we can use multiple aspects, human, numbers on a spreadsheet, to create a path for success for each student. And it's not going to be exactly the same path, and it shouldn't be, because each student learns differently. Some students may need more hands-on. Right. We've talked a lot about project-based learning, I think 2 weeks ago on the show, and some kids need that. They need that tactile environment to understand the concept. And a good teacher will know, hey, Johnny over there, he needs to get his fingers dirty to understand that concept. But Susie on the other side, I can stand up and lecture, and she's going to understand it from day one. And so that's where we use data a lot of times to drive how we're teaching, and then how do we set up? I think Julie, it's been over a month now. She talked about our station rotation model and how we've got different stations happening, and we can put the kid where that student needs to be to really understand that concept. So it's really two things happening at once, not just data, not just human, but using both of them in tandem together.
So, yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm going to jump in so I have 4 kids. So as a mom of 4 kids, they are all very, very different. I saw that very clearly displayed when we did digital learning, when we did remote learning back in the spring of last year, when everybody finished out the year remote. We did remote learning for the first 9 weeks with my kids. And so it became very apparent who could learn in the online environment. One of my kiddos loved it because he would sit in the class, he would get what he needed. He would do the actual work like this, and then he could move on to learning all of the nerdy things that he wanted to learn on his own as a second grader, and kind of move beyond the curriculum because he could get through it quickly. And he liked that. There was less wasted time for him. 2 of my kids, they need to be in the classroom. They need the discussions. They need the ability to kind of engage more physically with the actual things that are happening in the classroom and have hands-on and so while that was happening at home, it wasn't in that social environment. There wasn't as much of the true discussion back and forth with peers and things like that. And so they actually have benefited much more from being in the classroom. So I think that to Chase's point, not every student is the same. And our model for hundreds of years has predominantly been the same. Things have changed, but predominantly been the same. So I'm a big supporter of a variety of learning modalities, a lot of different schools. Maybe a project-based school would be great for some of my kids, and maybe the online school would work, but not for all of my kids. So just having the ability to choose based on the student, not just the family, but maybe a student goes to this charter school over here who does a project-based learning, or they go to this district school because they fit into that model. And so I think having that ability to really allow students to find the best way for them, whether that's a fully digital school or not, is really, really key to being able to drive success for students long term.
So can you address, please, a kid who's junior, senior, 11 or 12 grades, and data? How is that applied?
Yes, so the majority of our students at Learn for Life actually are that high school age-ish, or at least have been in high school. And so I think what we have found is most of the time the data will show you kind of what's going on with the student. But if you really want to know like the why or the how of how they got to that place, you really have to talk to the people who know them best, the teachers, the counselors they're working with. In our model, we have a supervising teacher who's kind of like their person. That's your point of contact. They are, the one that you stay in contact, and they know their students so well. And that relationship is so strong because they have those one-on-one discussions. And so I think that the data, especially as you're talking about a student who's launching into life, like they, if they're in 11th or 12th grade, they've given at least some thought to what their kind of future looks like. And if you are just focused on like, let's get them to high school graduation, like that's the bar, we're going to get them there, and you get them there and it's like, great, you passed and you're, a graduate now, but you haven't prepared them for life, then you've really failed. And so it's more than the data about their academics. It's a lot more about their life skills, their goals. What do they want to do? Do they want to go to college? And if so, how do we get them there? If they want to, go into a career in tech field, do they have those contacts? Do they have that, background? Where can we support them? So yeah, so I think it's a really important, especially in that high school phase, that you're thinking about where they want to go and not just the academic data.
God, I wish I had a teacher like you at that age. That's great. Okay, so I'm running out of questions, Chase. So what?
No, let me add one more to that really quick, Ed. One more thing that she was just saying, something that we haven't talked about, but I feel like it's important, is Jessica and I shared a title for 2 years. 2 years, we were officially the wisest wonks. So we're kind of policy wonks. We're nerds like that, and we absolutely love it. But one of the things that Jessica talked about with me in this piece was a personalized graduation path. And I'll start by saying, based on what Jessica just said, it's something that educators do not say. They don't agree with this in many instances, and that is, I don't think every kid should go to college.
I was about to say, you better duck. You got some Rotten Tomatoes.
I don't think so. When you look at the fact that some students are going to go to, and they're going to spend 4+ years of their life and get $200,000 in debt for a degree that is not useful in any industry, I don't think that's the right path. And we've put so much emphasis on go to college, get a degree, you'll get the absolute best job ever in your life, will be successful. But the kids go to 4 or 5 years, they spend a ton of money doing it, they can't get a job, and they're sitting around looking like, well, what now? Versus there are some kids who they leave and they go get a technical skill. So many times over the last 50 years, we've looked down on a plumber. Why? Plumbers start their own business, they make 6 figures, and they have success in their life. They're happy, they're successful, they've got a family. And so I don't think that as we look at our high school, that we should continue with that same plan forward. Again, we've got to take an individualized look at these students and say, what do you want to do? And how do we turn that into something that you can be a successful contributor to society moving forward? And part of that is through a personalized graduation path and a graduation plan and setting them up for success while they're 10th grade, 11th grade. I think we should be getting them a lot of exposure to different areas during those 4 years of high school so they can see, that's one of the reasons we have iCode at our Valor campus. I want to get them experience coding. Some of them might get in and say, I love this. I want to be a coder. I want to be a programmer. And then some get in and they take it for a semester and like, oof, that was terrible. I never want to touch a computer again. That's okay. I'm happy with that because now you know not to spend 4 years in a programming degree and spending all that money. Now you can go and say, man, I really want to get my fingers dirty in some dirt. How do I learn how to be a farmer, a gardener? How do I get my fingers dirty digging up pipes and doing HVAC? Like, there's so many things out there. And if it's interesting, Jessica, who were the essential workers? The people that had all these great big technical skills, or the guys that's got to make sure your air conditioner turns on in a hot Texas summer?
100%. When you said plumbers, that's exactly the challenge we're running up against right now. Texas had big snowpocalypse last week, pipes burst all over the state, and quickly the cities realized, we don't have enough master plumbers to address all of this. And so they're sending out letters to people who are not master plumbers, but who work in industries closely related like water purification workers and things like that, and saying, hey, can you repair some pipes? And we'll come behind you and inspect them if it's less than this amount, because they're realizing, hey, we have a shortage. And especially in light of an emergency situation, we don't have people who are skilled and certified to do these things, and we need to. So there's definitely a gap that we've seen widening. I am excited to see some states and schools really starting to talk about career education, and not in the way that we think of from when we were in school, and it was a very few, pathways. You had your welding, club, your ag, a couple of things, but really talking about what does that look like? What do the career options look like across the board? And how do we ensure that students are aware of them, have a pathway into them that is clear to them early on? And so I am excited about the progress, but I do think we did ourselves a real disservice. And I think it was well-intentioned, but a real disservice when we pushed college for everyone. I do think everybody should be able to go to college who would like to, and we should prepare them to do that. But it kind of makes the assumption that everybody wants to, which just simply isn't true or necessary.
What about the European model? Like, for instance, we have some family in Copenhagen, Denmark, but it's like this all over Europe, I believe, whereby there's a test, some kind of a test given, and if you don't pass it, it's not a crime. But if you do pass it, the government pays for your 4-year education and beyond. And if you don't pass it, then you're shepherded or led into more testing, which determines what digital skills you have, just like you're talking about now, whether it's farming or electrical or plumbing or whatever.
I think that kind of, I don't know, I think it might be just the American spirit, but I think that kind of got a bad rap at the pathways or the tracking of well, if you don't pass this test, then you can't go to college. So I think that there was a kind of a we're not going to do that in America because we want everybody to be able to chase the American dream and do what they want. But I think, again, we maybe have done ourselves a disservice because a lot of those career aptitude type assessments at least give students an understanding of where their skills are and aren't. And if they desire greatly to go into a place where they're not skilled, it doesn't say you can't do it. And I think that we could offer those type of career aptitude tests, help students to better understand where they might have an easier time moving forward on a pathway without completely closing off a pathway for them. And so I think there's value in those type of tools. And a lot of states and schools still use them to some extent. There's a lot of push now for more career planning, more career exposure in CTE pathways in a lot of states. So I think we're course correcting, but I think that our push for college for everybody and We don't want to track students. We don't want to like push them into a particular pathway based on an assessment. Kind of led us a little bit to off course, and I think we're getting better. But I do think that there was maybe a little bit of pushback against that. We like to do things different.
Well, this has really been educational for me, and I'm sure for our corporate audience. A lot of our audience are involved in talent management aspects, everything from acquisition, talent acquisition, to onboarding and training and development and deployment and comp and ben and tax and legal related to human resources. That is the 90% of our audience out there is involved in that kind of thing worldwide, mostly US, about 70% US, 20% Europe, 10% Asia, about. So this has been really educational. Chase, thanks for organizing this. Nice to meet you. And I welcome you to come back to Global TV, Cheska, and please feel free to contribute going forward.
Thank you. It was great to get to chat with you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, great. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Chase. Appreciate you.
Thanks. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah, okay. This is Ed signing off in San Diego. Ciao.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.